If Grok AI analyzed the global seismic record for the past 18 months and found a repeating pattern, a specific low-frequency signal appearing in the data hours before each major earthquake across every continent from a source that isn't any of the fault lines, would you believe it? Probably not. Most people wouldn't. But here is what the seismic record doesn't dispute. Venezuela, California, and Japan are not on the same tectonic plate. They are not connected by any fault system. They are separated by thousands of miles of open ocean. In classical geology, an earthquake in Venezuela has nothing to do with an earthquake in Japan. They are independent events on independent fault systems driven by independent tectonic forces, except they keep happening at the same time, not approximately the same time, not the same week, the same window, multiple significant seismic events on separate continents with no shared fault structure, clustering in time in a way that the standard model of independent tectonic events does not predict. A research team fed 18 months of global seismic data into Grok with one instruction: find the pattern. Don't assume independence. Find what the events have in common. What came back was not a coincidence. It was a source. I'm Dr. James Mercer. This just came in. Let's get into it. Here is the question the USGS has never answered in a public briefing. When earthquakes occur simultaneously in locations with no shared fault system, what is the protocol for investigating a common cause? The official answer, when pressed, is that simultaneous seismic events in unconnected locations are a statistical inevitability. With hundreds of earthquakes happening globally every day, some will always cluster in time. The clustering is not evidence of a connection. It is a feature of random distribution. This is a reasonable statistical argument. It is also the argument that makes investigating a common cause structurally impossible before the investigation begins. If the official framework classifies simultaneous unconnected earthquakes as a statistical artifact by definition, then no pattern of simultaneous unconnected earthquakes can ever be evidence of a common cause. The conclusion is built into the premise. Grok doesn't use that framework. It doesn't start with an assumption about independence. It looks at the data and finds what's there. What's there is not random. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What I'm about to walk you through has been in the seismic record the whole time. The AI just had to know where to look. Let's go back to the beginning. To understand what Grok found, you need to understand what the standard model of earthquake prediction says and what it consistently gets wrong. The standard model treats each fault system as an independent unit. The San Andreas Fault in California moves because the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate are grinding past each other in that specific location. The fault zones of Venezuela move because the Caribbean Plate is interacting with the South American Plate. The subduction zones of Japan move because the Pacific Plate is driving under the Eurasian Plate. These are different plates, different boundaries, different forces, different depths. In the standard model, they are unconnected. The model has a strong predictive track record for individual fault systems. The San Andreas will produce large earthquakes. The Japanese subduction zones will produce large earthquakes. These predictions are correct. The model is accurate about what will happen in each location. What it cannot predict is when, and it has no mechanism for explaining why separate, independent systems would show coordinated timing. The phenomenon of earthquake clustering, multiple significant events occurring within a short time window across distant locations, has been documented in the scientific literature for decades. It has a name: remote triggering. The established mechanism is direct. Seismic waves from a large earthquake travel around the globe and can trigger smaller events at distant fault systems. The 2004 Sumatra earthquake, for example, produced detectable seismic activity in fault systems as far away as Alaska within days of the main event. Remote triggering is real. It is documented. It is accepted. What the standard framework does not accept is the reverse, the idea that simultaneous events at multiple locations could reflect a common deep source causing the triggering rather than one event triggering the others. In the accepted model, there is always a primary event and secondary triggers. There is no mechanism for a shared originating signal that produces primary events at multiple locations simultaneously. Grok found the signal, and it is not coming from any of the fault lines. The scientific case for deep Earth common sources of seismic activity has been building for decades at the margins of the literature. In the 1990s, researchers studying the relationship between deep mantle dynamics and surface seismicity proposed that thermal mantle plumes, columns of abnormally hot material rising from the deep mantle, could influence the stress state of overlying tectonic plates. The mechanism was theoretical. If a plume rises beneath a plate, it creates a thermal bulge, which changes the mechanical stress across the plate, which can simultaneously affect multiple fault systems in different directions from the plume's position. The proposal was published. It was reviewed. It was accepted as a theoretical possibility. It was not incorporated into the operational earthquake prediction framework because it was not operationally useful. You cannot predict which fault will fail, and when based on mantle plume dynamics, the mechanism was too diffuse, too slow, too difficult to measure directly. What changed is the data. Modern seismic networks have become dense enough and sensitive enough to detect low-frequency signals, frequencies far below those associated with conventional fault rupture, that originate in the deep earth and propagate through the mantle before reaching the surface. These signals are called seismic hum, or Earth's background noise. They have been studied since the 1990s, and their origin is debated. Some researchers attribute them entirely to ocean wave interaction with the seafloor. Others argue the signal contains a component from internal Earth dynamics that the ocean wave model cannot fully account for. The disagreement has been active in the literature for 30 years. It has not been resolved, and the operational earthquake prediction community, the USGS, National Seismic Networks, the agencies responsible for public earthquake warnings, has not incorporated the anomalous deep signal component into any public monitoring framework. The signals are in the data. They have been there for decades. Nobody in an operational role has been looking at them in relation to surface seismicity clustering. Grok looked. The research team's instruction to Grok was specific. Take 18 months of global seismic data from public archives, the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology Network, which aggregates real-time seismic data from thousands of stations worldwide, and identify any signal that appears consistently in the hours before significant seismic events across geographically unconnected locations. The AI returned a finding in 3 parts. The signal in the hours preceding significant earthquakes in Venezuela, California, and Japan across multiple separate event clusters over the 18-month window, a low-frequency precursor signal appeared in the global seismic network. The signal was not local to any of the 3 regions. It was global. It appeared at stations distributed across the entire network with a specific propagation pattern consistent with a source in the deep mantle beneath the Central Pacific, not beneath any of the 3 earthquake zones, beneath the Pacific, between them. The timing. The precursor signal appeared between 4 and 17 hours before each clustering event, with the variation corresponding to the distance between the deep source location and each affected fault system. The signal traveled through the mantle at a consistent velocity, consistent with known seismic wave propagation through the lower mantle. The timing is not coincidental. It is consistent with a source-to-target propagation model. The pattern. The sequence of affected fault systems across the 18-month window is not random. The clustering events move. Each successive cluster affects fault systems in a slightly different geographic distribution, rotating around the Central Pacific source location in a pattern consistent with a thermal plume head slowly migrating through the lower mantle. The plume is not stationary. It is moving, and the fault systems it destabilizes are moving with it. The AI identified the source, the mechanism, the timing, and the trajectory. in 18 months of public data that has been sitting in open archives since the events occurred. As the team continued pulling the analysis, 3 additional findings emerged. The first revelation: the precursor signal has a history. The AI was asked to extend the search backward through the full available archive. Not just 18 months, but the complete digital seismic record going back to the early 1990s when dense global networks first became operational. The precursor signal appears throughout the archive. It has been present in the data for over 30 years. Every major clustering event in the global seismic record, every period where significant earthquakes struck multiple unconnected locations within a short time window, is preceded by the same low-frequency signal from the same deep Pacific source. 30 years, hundreds of clustering events, one consistent precursor signal, all in the public archive. Never identified in any published study as a systematic precursor to surface seismicity clustering. The second revelation, Zhang Heng knew. In 132 AD, a Chinese inventor and court astronomer named Zhang Heng presented Emperor Shun of Han with a device he called the Hufeng Didong Yi, the instrument for measuring the seasonal winds and the movements of the earth. It was a bronze vessel approximately 2 meters in diameter, sealed, containing a pendulum mechanism connected to 8 dragon heads around the exterior perimeter. Each dragon held a bronze ball in its mouth. When seismic waves reached the device, the internal mechanism caused one dragon to release its ball into a bronze toad below, indicating the direction from which the seismic energy had arrived. The device detected earthquakes hundreds of miles away before the shaking was perceptible locally. Court officials initially dismissed a detection in 138 AD as a malfunction. Days later, a messenger arrived reporting a major earthquake in Gansu province, 400 miles in the direction the dragon had indicated. Zhang Heng's instrument was detecting low-frequency seismic precursors, not the high-frequency shaking of the earthquake itself. The local shaking hadn't started when the device triggered. The low-frequency waves that travel faster and farther through the earth before the main rupture arrives. The same category of signal that Grok identified in the modern seismic archive. Zhang Heng built a precursor detector in 132 AD. The mechanism he identified, low-frequency directional signals preceding main events, is the same mechanism the AI found in 30 years of modern data, 1,800 years apart. The same phenomenon. The third revelation, the next location, because the precursor signal appears consistently before clustering events, and because the trajectory of the migrating plume source can be modeled from the pattern of clustering events across 30 years, the AI's analysis produces a forward projection. The migration path of the deep source, extended from its documented trajectory, points toward the next geographic region where the precursor signal's effects will concentrate. The team submitted this finding, the source identification, the 30-year pattern, and the forward projection to 3 seismic research groups for independent analysis. 2 did not respond. The third responded with a request for the raw data files, confirmed receipt, and has not communicated further. The pattern Grok identified in the modern seismic record is not without ancient precedent. Multiple ancient traditions contain descriptions of periods of simultaneous global geological upheaval, events where the ground shook in many places at once as a precursor to larger changes. The Sumerian flood narrative in the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a period before the Great Flood marked by the earth trembling in multiple directions simultaneously. Not a single great earthquake, a period of distributed global shaking. The language of the cuneiform text uses a specific construction indicating plural locations, not a single event. The biblical accounts of geological upheaval similarly describe distributed events. The ground shaking in Egypt, in Canaan, at Sinai, in patterns that ancient scribes recorded as simultaneous occurrences at distant locations. The theological framing varies, but the physical description is consistent. Multiple locations, same time window. The Hindu Vedic texts contain specific passages in the Mahabharata describing a period before the end of the Dvapara Yuga, one of the 4 cosmic ages, marked by the earth shaking in many places at once. The language is geological, not purely symbolic. Specific geographic regions are named. Specific sequences of events are described. 3 independent ancient textual traditions, 3 independent geographical origins, all describing the same physical phenomenon, simultaneous distributed seismic activity as a precursor marker for a larger transition. The AI cross-referenced the geographic regions named in the ancient accounts against its model of the migrating deep mantle source. The regions named in the ancient texts fall within the predicted impact zones of the deep Pacific source at the historical dates those texts are estimated to reflect. The ancient record is not describing mythology, it is describing observations that match the 30-year pattern the AI found in the modern seismic archive. Here is what the USGS's official position on earthquake clustering cannot account for. The seismic archive is public. The Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology Network makes its data freely available. The 30 years of data the AI analyzed is accessible to any researcher with the tools to process it. The precursor signal the AI found is in that data. It has been in that data since the earliest recordings. No published paper in the earthquake prediction literature has identified this signal as a systematic precursor to surface seismicity clustering. The individual components of the finding are in the literature. Deep mantle signals are studied. Low-frequency seismic precursors are documented. Mantle plume effects on surface tectonics are modeled. But the synthesis has not been published. The reason is not technical. The tools to run this analysis have existed for years. The data has existed for 30 years. The reason is framing. The operational earthquake prediction community works within a framework that treats clustering as statistical artifact. A precursor signal from a deep mantle source does not fit that framework. It requires a different model of how earthquakes originate, not just where the faults are, but what is loading the faults. A different model of earthquake origin has implications beyond the scientific literature. Early warning systems would need to be redesigned. The regions flagged as high risk would shift based on the source's trajectory rather than fault proximity alone. The forward projection that the AI's analysis produces would need to be disclosed publicly. And disclosing a model-based prediction of the next clustering event's geographic focus has consequences the USGS's current public communication framework is not designed to handle. The finding is in the public archive. The analysis is documented. The forward projection exists. The USGS's last public statement on earthquake clustering described it as a known statistical phenomenon with no predictive utility. That statement was issued before the AI's analysis was completed. It has not been updated. So here is where this lands. Grok AI analyzed 18 months of global seismic data from public archives and identified a low-frequency precursor signal appearing in the hours before each clustering event, originating from a deep mantle source beneath the Central Pacific, not from any of the affected fault systems. Extended across 30 years of data, the signal appears before every major clustering event in the modern record. The source is migrating. The trajectory of that migration is consistent across 3 decades of observations. Zhang Heng detected the same category of precursor signal in 132 AD and built an instrument to track it. Ancient textual traditions across 3 independent cultures describe the same distributed simultaneous shaking as a precursor marker and named geographic regions that correspond to the AI's predicted impact zones at the historical dates those records reflect. The AI's 30-year model produces a forward projection, a geographic focus for the next clustering event based on the source's documented migration trajectory. The finding was submitted to 3 seismic research groups. 2 did not respond. The 3rd confirmed receipt of the data and went silent. The forward projection is specific. It names a region. It provides a time window based on the migration rate documented over 3 decades. And when the team overlaid the projected impact zone against the early warning systems currently operating in that region, they found that the seismic monitoring network in the projected area was, against the historical average for regions of comparable geological risk, significantly under-resourced, fewer stations, lower sensitivity thresholds, shorter warning windows. The region the AI's model identifies as the next convergence point for the deep Pacific source is also the region with the least warning infrastructure relative to its modeled risk. That is not a coincidence. Infrastructure decisions for seismic monitoring networks are made based on the standard model's risk assessments. If the standard model doesn't recognize a common deep source, it doesn't flag the regions in the source's projected path as elevated risk. The infrastructure gap follows directly from the framework gap. The data is public, the signal is in the archive, the forward projection is documented, and the region it points to has been operating on the assumption that it is not in a high-risk window. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. When the next piece on this goes up, you need to have seen this one first. I'm Dr. James Mercer. The moment I have more, you'll be the first to know.